Political panel. Megan Hayes is back, Chief of Staff at the American International Group, former Special Assistant to the President. Maura Gillespie, founder and principal at Blue Stack Strategies, back with us as well. Maura, what is conservative about forcing a company to divest in an arbitrary period of time, in this case 6 months, or be banned? Is that Republican?
Republicans used to stand for pro-business. I think so. To that end, I don't really know that they're messaging to the best of their abilities there. But TikTok, with their relationship to China, is a concern. And Republicans have been harping on that aspect of the control that ByteDance has and the ties to the Communist Party of China. So it's interesting now because obviously the biggest role that has changed here is Trump's involvement. Trump has recently met with some folks who are invested heavily in TikTok and is dissuading Congress from taking action. And so you're hearing that messaging change where they're saying they're not trying to ban TikTok anymore and that they're really just looking for them to distance themselves from China's CCP, so the Communist Party there. So it's really, again, it's all about Trump, and that's not what the original onset of this was. So it's disappointing.
Yeah, Jeff Yass, of course, who I think you're referring to, a big TikTok investor, Republican donor, who we know the former president has met with recently. Even so, even with Trump talking about how he doesn't think TikTok should be banned now, despite what he may have thought during his administration, only 16 Republicans didn't vote for this bill in the House, Megan. Huge bipartisan majority. Only 65 votes against the whole thing. It's in its entirety. You don't really see numbers like that in this Washington right now, Megan. And yet, that's not a mandate for the Senate. Do you think the Senate will pass this?
I think the Senate has a tough go at this. I think that there's a lot of other impacts that we're not talking about. There's a large economic impact right up against an election. There's an outreach issue here. It gets very political. I do think that there's obviously a national security component here. And I think that one thing that Democrats and Republicans can probably also agree on is the messaging here has been botched.
Maybe then the president is calling the bluff of Congress. Sure, I'll sign it because I know it'll never get to the White House. TikTok very effectively squashed all of this with an extensive lobbying spend last year. They're working now on the Senate. Is that going to be a more powerful force than Donald Trump? Because it's proven to work so far.
I mean, everyone has seen how far Donald Trump's tentacles can go, so I would not underestimate his power in some of the business community. I do think that the Senate is going to have an uphill battle. I mean, this is a national security issue. They're not wrong in that. But I think that using the term ban is not in their favor, and it's not working for them.
All right, so we'll see what Chuck Schumer decides to do with this. He hasn't really indicated either way beyond saying
today?
The statement was incredibly short.
Looking forward to that bill
the legislation, here. No real hint, no real endorsement, certainly. But of course, the Senate is a very different beast than the House is. But I want to talk a little bit more about the House, Maura, because of course we all got the news yesterday that Ken Buck, the Republican congressman from Colorado who had already said he was going to retire, isn't even going to stick it out until November. He is leaving next Friday, March 22nd. That margin is going to get even tighter for House Speaker Mike Johnson. How are we going to get anything done?
That's going to be really tough. And I think you're seeing the fraying of the Republican Party again, because Republicans are currently on their GOP retreat. A lot of members didn't show up. This is just a reason to show you that MAGA movement is not sustainable because it's not been about legislating. One, their messaging has been terrible. We just talked about TikTok. The impeachment is going completely south. And now you have an even smaller majority than you had to begin with, which was already razor thin. This is a real problem for Republicans. The RNC just got slashed by 60 plus staffers. They can't fundraise very well. They're being, completely trounced by the DNC when it comes to fundraising. The Republicans are having a real issue here, and Ken Buck leaving it in this way to, and some people are saying it's to kind of keep Lauren Boebert out from having a chance at having a seat here in Colorado. I kind of like it, but I think it's interesting the devolving state of the GOP in the House.
I was surprised by Ken's announcement. I'm looking forward to talking with him about that. That quote is from the Speaker of the House. You worked for a former Speaker. Maura, can you just talk to us about what an unusual move this is? No one saw it coming. I'm leaving next week.
Again, this just shows you the lack of unity in the House GOP. There's no real trust or even in some respects, some respect between the leadership and rank and file, because for a lot of the members that are in Congress, especially on the House side, they no longer believe in rank and file versus leadership. They don't see Mike Johnson as the leader of their party or as the leader of their coalition and of their conference. And that says and speaks volumes, truly, about what's going on right now in Congress.
Nikki Haley, Maura, what happened in Georgia last night, 77,000 votes go to the former candidate, who, of course, was still in the race when a lot of people were early voting. Will we now in the primaries see her drop off, or could this be a persistent protest vote?
I'd like to see it be a consistent protest vote, to be quite honest. But it does show us that Donald Trump has a real problem in reaching across to the Republicans who are tired of his antics and are sick of giving money to a campaign that is only set out to really stop him from going to prison. And so I think that that's, telling that there are still so many voters that are either protest voting or not showing up. I mean, Hawaii had less than 5,000 people vote in the primary. That's pretty shocking, a pretty low number. So, again, we have 8 months or just shy of 8 months till Election Day. So a lot of time for this general election campaigning to go underway and to get people motivated. But I don't know what will motivate them aside from not wanting the other person to win.
Well, yeah, the motivation question is an interesting one to consider, and this is a conversation we've been having today. When you already really know these candidates, one served as president, one is the president now, you probably know how you feel about each of them. So it raises the question of to what degree minds can change over the course of 8 months. New polling from USA Today and Suffolk released today shows Trump is ahead of Biden 40-38 in the general, but 1 in 4 said they could change their minds before November. Alan Abramowitz of Emory told us it's probably more 5 to 10% than 25% that could change their minds. But what do you think?
I agree with that. I don't think that many people are going to change their minds. I think that the issue that the campaigns have now is voter turnout. You need to get people to turn out because neither candidate seemed to be able to change undecided voters. So you need to get people to show up, and that's going to impact down ballot races. So it's really incumbent on the Biden campaign to continue to build a broad coalition to go after those Haley voters and to really bring them over to win in November. But I do think that it's about voter turnout now. It's not, people aren't going to change their minds.
How does Joe Biden clear the bar to the extent that he did at the State of the Union and see no bump? Even a sort of average State of the Union, you see a little bump with the road show. People are talking about you. You get on the front page and lead the newscast. To sink to a new all-time low, according to 538, tells us what?
I think that people have this expectation that they watched the State of the Union and wanted to see the president make an error or to forget something or look like this
Is that it?
dithering old man that
this
he's just not.
This was the NASCAR crowd hoping to see a crash.
Yeah, exactly. And I just don't think that's realistic. That's not who Joe Biden is. That's not who he is as a president. So I think that people, they're like, oh, you're out there being the president. You're out there giving your speech and telling what you've done for the country and your vision to move forward. We weren't watching the crash that the news was trying to make it be. So I think that, the bar here is pretty high for him to change the approval rating. But I do think that he has opportunity to move some of these voters from the Haley camp over to him. But it is, again, about voter turnout come November.
Well, and whether or not you can get voters to show up for the main parties or whether they'd maybe choose a third party more quickly, just on that third party. RFK Jr. says he's going to announce a VP coming up here pretty soon, and maybe it'll be Aaron Rodgers. Really?
So to that end, I think it's largely because you have an exhausted voter base. People are not interested. You've seen the polls, 70%. People don't want this rematch that we are now getting. And both parties have more or less, isolated a lot of the white heterosexual males. So those are the ones that are really leaning towards RFK Jr. What better way to appeal to them further than by having a NFL quarterbacker be your VP running mate? So I think that they're trying to appeal to them. The rest of the electorate is pretty exhausted by the politics and by the, partisanship that's happening on Capitol Hill. So I think, to Megan's point and what we've been talking about, voter turnout is important here. But RFK Jr. is definitely capitalizing on the celebrity aspect of his campaign.
Guess they'd have a corner on the anti-vax vote. We can talk next time about who that might come out of. Thanks to Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie for a great conversation, as always.